Hey there everyone. So for this video, it's going to be a bit of a fan guide. So which team should you cheer for in the 2023 Stanley Cup Playoffs? A lot of us out there have favorite teams that aren't anywhere near the playoff picture, myself included. So this video should definitely help you, or perhaps if you're a new fan of the NHL, or maybe you tune into hockey once in a while, but maybe you don't follow the regular season so much. You want somebody to look forward to in the playoffs, so maybe this video will be useful to you as well. And once you've watched this, be sure to comment down below which team are you rooting for in the playoffs and why, especially if you have to pick a second favorite team. And I'm going to be putting out all sorts of content throughout the playoffs in the form of videos, matchup previews, and also all sorts of live streams. We do play-by-play audio here during the playoffs. So I'll go team by team and I'll list some compelling reasons why you should consider supporting that team in the playoffs. And that will include some teams that haven't quite secured a playoff berth just yet and could actually even miss the playoffs. I just want to be thorough from that perspective. But first, a word from a sponsor I think a lot of you out there will like, and that is Into the AM. So a lot of you out there like collecting and wearing hockey jerseys, but equally important to the comfort of the jersey is the comfort of everything underneath it or part of your outfit. So that's why I'm happy to introduce to you Into the AM. This is an independent apparel company that makes t-shirts, hoodies, leg wear, hat wear, beanies, even more. Okay, so you're probably like, what does this have to do with hockey? Well, take a look at their website and you might find some designs that remind you of your favorite team, whether that's something subtle like the Arizona Coyotes, or perhaps the Minnesota Wild, or maybe even something as bold as the Seattle Kraken. I recently wore all of that on a hiking trip in Montana, did some vlogging for our awesome members, and I loved how everything fit and felt. The shirts and hoodies are a polyester blend, meaning they're going to stretch a little bit to conform to your body where needed. No annoying collar tags, more wrinkle resistant than cotton, and sizing that's consistent with what I typically wear. I also had an acrylic wool beanie that was as soft and smooth as you'll find for that material, but I sadly lost it on the hike, so I'm gonna have to pick up another one. So upgrade your wardrobe by tapping the link in the pinned comment down below or the video description. That's intotheam.com/McJesus, and you can save in two ways. First of all, you'll save if you buy t-shirts in multiples of 3. So for just $60 US, you can get 3 of these beautiful graphic t-shirts, or for just $50, you can get 3 of those basic t-shirts like that Coyotes inspired one I showed you just a moment ago. And second, by using that link below, you'll save an additional 10% on your order, or you can just type in the promo code McJesus. Well, there you have it. Pick up some amazing threads from Into the AM. I know I'll be shopping with them again very soon. Now back to our video. Let's start with the defending champions. That's the Colorado Avalanche. This has not been a cakewalk for them whatsoever. They've had just a multitude of injuries. A lot of other teams out there have, but a lot of just big name players for Colorado, like Captain Gabriel Landeskog, have been out for large stretches of this season. So for them just to get into the playoffs, it's almost kind of impressive. But when you look at that roster, when it's completely healed up, not only are they one of the most impressive rosters in the NHL, but they're also one of the most exciting teams in the NHL as well, with players like Nathan MacKinnon and Cale Makar. Just the speed that both of those players bring. The team that they beat last year was the Tampa Bay Lightning. However, they did win the Stanley Cup in both 2021 and 2020. So if they won the Stanley Cup this year, they would be, by definition, a dynasty in the NHL. You have to win 3 Stanley Cups within a 4-year period. So they would be the first true dynasty since the Edmonton Oilers of the 1980s, although I would count the Chicago Blackhawks at least in the 2010s. And certainly instrumental to that are a number of future Hall of Famers, just like the Avalanche and several other teams that we'll talk about here. You have some of the best players of this era, including Andrei Vasilevsky in goal, arguably maybe the greatest playoff goaltender since, I would say, Patrick Waugh, perhaps. You still have Victor Hedman, Steven Stamkos, Nikita Kucherov. If the Hart Trophy could be given out to somebody not on the Edmonton Oilers this year, he would be the MVP. And this year, they haven't been particularly dominant, so even though I think that some out there expect them to make a bit of a deep run, they're not as big of a favorite as they've been in previous years. Now, one team that stands in their way of making a really deep run this year is the Boston Bruins. I'll go by points percentage for the rest of the video. The Bruins, oh my goodness, they could possibly set the record for the most wins in an NHL season, or even the best points overall. So an absolutely historic season for a team that I didn't even think would make the playoffs this year. But there was a factor there, and that was Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci being on the team. So with them signing 1-year deals, this is kind of what we can consider a last dance if you've seen that documentary from ESPN on the Chicago Bulls. I think the Bruins are kind of in that situation right now. Lots of future Hall of Famers on the team: David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand, Charlie McAvoy, maybe even Hampus Lindholm. But with Bergeron and Krejci getting a little bit older, and just due to the nature of their contracts, who knows if they'll stick around past this. This team, this core has been succeeding quite a bit in the NHL for the last 12 years. In 2011, they won the Stanley Cup. They went to 2 other finals. But one story you can't underscore here is that of the head coach, and that is Jim Montgomery. So 3 years ago, he was coaching the Dallas Stars. He was fired mid-season so he could seek treatment for alcohol abuse. The Stars ended up going to the Stanley Cup final later that year. Now, Montgomery, this is his first season as a head coach since then, so he's really come a long way. It would be an absolutely wonderful end to the season if he could win the Stanley Cup. And one other thing I'll throw in there with the Boston Bruins, there's no better post-game celebration than the goalie hugs between Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman. The next team is the Carolina Hurricanes. They last won the Stanley Cup in 2006. So first of all, if you have any Finnish connections, this might be one of the teams for you. I'll talk about another team later, but you've got Sebastian Aho, Teuvo Teravainen, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Jesse Puljujärvi, and Antti Raanta on the team. They have an immensely talented defensive group, and I know that doesn't sound sexy out there, but when those guys engage offensively, this team can be very exciting to watch. I'm talking about, of course, Brent Burns, Jacob Slavin, even Brady Shea has surprisingly contributed a lot offensively this year, or even Jalen Chatfield jumping into the play. And like a few teams that I'll mention kind of in the southern states, North Carolina, Raleigh, the fans there can be absolutely raucous. It's a great playoff atmosphere that they've cultivated there in Carolina. And lastly, on top of all that, this is the team that I'll be rooting for in the playoffs, mostly for Brent Burns because I'm a San Jose Sharks fan. The New Jersey Devils are our next team. They last won the Stanley Cup in 2003. They also went in 2012 to the final. But since then, they've only made the playoffs just one time. So despite that, they actually just completely overshot our expectations this year, or at least I think so. And they've put together not only an amazing group of players, but a really exciting brand of hockey. They reminded me a little bit of the Avalanche last year with how they're able to just constantly pressure opponents in their own zone. And that's even with players as small as Jack Hughes. I think that he doesn't get enough credit for what he's able to do along the wall. But anyway, you got Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier, who they acquired at the trade deadline to help out with their power play. So a very exciting, fast brand of hockey. And lastly, with the Devils, they do have a lot of Swiss-born players. So if you have any connections there, you've got players like Nico Hischier, the captain, Timo Meier, Jonas Siegenthaler, and Akira Schmid. Okay, our next team is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, a lot of you out there know they haven't won the Stanley Cup since the original Six era in 1967. They haven't been to the Stanley Cup final since then, and their last playoff series victory was 19 years ago in 2004. So a curse needs to be lifted for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And on top of that, and this applies to some other teams in this video, a Canadian team hasn't won the Stanley Cup since 1993. So it's been forever, seemingly. We're talking about Canada's game, right? The national sport. With the Maple Leafs, you got the big four, right? You got Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, John Tavares, and Willie Nylander. All four of these guys can do amazing things together, especially on the power play. The Leafs have the top power play in the Eastern Conference, so with the man advantage, no other team is as exciting. So hopefully they can break through and win around this year. So if you want to help with lifting a curse, then this would be the team for you. The next team is the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, they went all the way to the Stanley Cup final in 2018, their first season as a franchise, and a fair number of players are still on the team, like Jonathan Marchessault, Riley Smith, Shea Theodore, Braden McNabb, to name a few. So if you want to see those guys finish the job, then maybe you want to root for Vegas. But really for Vegas, a big piece of this is Jack Eichel, a former second overall pick. He has never been to the playoffs until this year, so it's a big moment for him. He has been kind of the straw that stirs the drink, at least offensively, for this club, and he really has turned things around after recovering from just a very serious surgery a couple seasons ago. So I think that he has kind of a compelling purpose there. It's a very loud, nutty atmosphere there in Vegas, especially with their sort of pre-game antics on the ice. And you also have to look at the goaltending situation. You have a rookie goaltender in Logan Thompson on one end of things. I know he's been a little banged up recently. They also have Jonathan Quick, who won 2 Stanley Cups with LA and then was unceremoniously traded at the deadline this year. We're talking about a future Hall of Famer, maybe the best American-born goaltender, at least of this era. Ryan Miller, very close second. So I think that for him to kind of get revenge and maybe even beat his former club in the playoffs, that would be magnificent, and he could possibly wrap up his career as a Stanley Cup champion. Now we've got the New York Rangers. They last won the Stanley Cup in 1994. That broke a 54-year drought. So they've only won one Stanley Cup since 1940. They have maybe the most skilled top 6 forward group in the NHL. At least they're in that conversation with the likes of Mika Zibanejad, Chris Kreider, Artemi Panarin, one of the elite playmakers out there. And of course, they recently acquired Patrick Kane, 3-time Stanley Cup winner, maybe the greatest American-born player of all time, and sniper Vladimir Tarasenko in that group as well. They have arguably the best goaltender in the NHL in Igor Shesterkin. He's finally getting it together as we head into the playoffs here, so he can perform at an absolutely elite level in crunch time. And this season, they've had arguably the best defenseman in the NHL in Adam Fox. At least he would have my vote if I had to give out the Norris Trophy. No slight to some of the other wonderful defensemen out there, but all around, he's been terrific. So those are some great reasons to look forward to the Rangers. Now back out west, we've got the Minnesota Wild. So I think the biggest reason to cheer for them, first of all, they've never been to the Stanley Cup final. They've been around since 2000. But really, this is to ease the suffering of just Minnesota sports fans in general. When you look at the major sports leagues out there, NHL, MLB, NFL, NBA, you can even throw MLS in there. There has not been a championship in the Twin Cities since 1991. That's 32 years ago. That's incredible. So that curse needs to absolutely be lifted. And Minnesota does pride itself as the state of hockey, so hopefully they can break through here. Kirill Kaprizov would be a huge factor, one of the greatest scorers and playmakers in the NHL. You also have Ryan Reeves, who they acquired earlier in this season. The team has been on an absolute tear with him in the lineup, one of the most intimidating players of the era. And lastly, one of their goaltenders is 38-year-old Marc-Andre Fleury. I'm not sure if he'll start in the playoffs, but he's won Stanley Cups before. He's one of the most beloved hockey figures in my lifetime, I would have to say, especially when he almost fought Jordan Binnington just a few weeks ago. So one of the great characters of the game, and just one of the great classy figures there. So a few reasons for the Wild. The next team is the Los Angeles Kings. Now, they last won the Stanley Cup in 2014. They also won in 2012, and both of those cups were unprecedented runs entirely. Now, from those cup-winning teams, the Kings still have Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty, first ballot Hall of Famers in my book. Can they win one more with those guys? So you got the old guard over there, and you also have the new guard in the form of Quentin Byfield and Arthur Kaliev, the sign of great things to come for a team that is loaded with a lot of top-rated prospects. So you look at it that way, and in between, they have a lot of players who don't get enough credit out there, like Adrian Kempe, maybe the best goal scorer who never gets talked about, at least from my observations. Victor Arvidsson has had a tremendous rebound this year with the Kings. Philip Danault has been an excellent acquisition for them. Even a young defenseman like Sean Dursey can put up a ton of points out there. So this team is a lot more exciting. They've gotten much better on the power play, and they've really kind of reshaped themselves from where they were back in those cup-winning days. Next up, we have the Edmonton Oilers. They last won the Stanley Cup in 1990 as they finished off a run of winning 5 Stanley Cups in a 7-season period. Now, in my opinion, there are really 2 compelling reasons to cheer for the Oilers, kind of like last year as well. First of all, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, maybe the 2 best forwards in the world. McDavid is the best player on the planet, the most exciting player I've ever watched. So really, I would just want the Oilers to win so I can watch this guy for a 2-month period in the postseason. He is going to score over 150 points this year. That is something that hasn't been done since the 1990s. So he's breaking records, he's setting milestones, and Draisaitl is second in the NHL in scoring as well, and they don't always play together either. So Draisaitl, number 29, is still an amazing, incredible player. And second of all, I think it'd be amazing if the Oilers won the Stanley Cup, not just for a Canadian team out there, but for some of the members of their community who were just tragically lost over the last couple of seasons. I think of their former player, Colby Cave. I think of former longtime equipment manager, Joey Moss, and also Ben Stelter, the little kid who the players rallied around all of last season and who lost his life last year just from a horrific form of cancer. So I think that would be an incredible story to do it for those individuals and to do it with 2 of the most exciting players that we've seen in our lifetime. Next up, I've got the Dallas Stars. They last won the Stanley Cup back in 1999. They also went to the final in 2020. So with them, kind of like the Carolina Hurricanes, if you have any Finnish connections, this team plays in the other conference too, so you can root for both teams. We're talking about Roope Hintz, Joel Kiviranta, Miro Heiskanen, one of the best defensemen in the NHL, Esa Lindell, who's no slouch either, and Jani Hakanpää has been an awesome acquisition for them as well. With the Dallas Stars, last year, they nearly won against the Calgary Flames, even though they were an underdog, and that was almost purely because of Jake Ottinger. Ottinger was incredible. So if there's one goaltender out there in the playoffs who I'm looking forward to watching, it would be him. And I mean, there are going to be lots of other amazing goaltenders in these playoffs. So I think about Ottinger. And also they have one of the best top lines in the NHL in the likes of Jason Robertson, Roope Hintz, and Joe Pavelski. I especially would love to see Joe Pavelski win his first Stanley Cup. He's 38 years old right now. And so a Stanley Cup, who knows, maybe he could actually make a bid for the Hall of Fame. How could I not wear this shirt for the next team? That is the Seattle Kraken. They're just in their second year, so it's their first time in the playoffs, really turned things around versus last year, and they've become a very exciting team to watch, very different from the team that I originally saw with the defense that they had, the goaltending they had. It's really the forward group and the depth of this forward group, so anybody can go out there and score 15, 20 goals in a season. Daniel Sprong, Yanni Gourde, Jordan Eberle, Matty Beniers centering the top line as just a 20-year-old, Jared McCann, of course, a 30-plus goal season, and Vince Dunn has kind of come out of nowhere as well for 60 points. So really with a team like this, they're not expected to go deep in the playoffs. I think a lot of people are going to count them out, especially if they're going up against a team like Edmonton in the first round. But that's when teams like this can actually thrive. I think it's going to be very exciting for the fans in Seattle and also for the fans just east of Spokane where I am. So I am in Kraken territory. So I'm really looking forward to seeing if they can do some damage in the postseason. So at this point, there are 3 more playoff spots that are up for grabs. There is 1 up for grabs in the West, and there are 2 up for grabs in the East. So let's go through the West and talk about the 3 teams who are competing for that 1 spot. I'll do this quickly since we don't know for sure if they're actually going to make the playoffs. So my first team in the West here is the Winnipeg Jets. They've never been to a Stanley Cup final, neither as today's Winnipeg Jets or the Winnipeg Jets of the 1980s or 90s. They have maybe the smallest market in the NHL, but those fans absolutely bring it in the playoffs with the Winnipeg whiteout, one of the greatest traditions in the NHL. They have one of the top goaltenders in the NHL in Connor Hellebuck. Josh Morrissey, or should we say Norrisy, should definitely be in contention as the best defenseman this year in the NHL. So that's for Winnipeg. Next up, we've got the Nashville Predators. Now, this team has been to the playoffs pretty much every year for the last, 15 or 20 years, but they've never won a Stanley Cup. So could it be their time? Well, probably not. Look at the forward group of this team. This looks like an ECHL roster. So if you want to root for a true underdog, I think Nashville is absolutely one of those teams. Again, a Sunbelt state with a very loud, passionate fan base. Before games, they'll throw catfish onto the ice. And outside the arena, there will actually be a car with the logo of their opponent. And so people take turns one by one of smashing that car with a baseball bat. Yusei Saros, just to get back to hockey here, he didn't play for the team last year in the postseason. He was injured. So I think that he's absolutely chomping at the bit if they get into the postseason to really show everybody out there what he's capable of doing. He is an elite goaltender and a huge reason why the team's still in playoff contention at this point. And the other team fighting for a spot in the West is the Calgary Flames. Their last Stanley Cup came in 1989. A couple of reasons to cheer for Calgary. First of all, the sea of red is just a spectacle. I already talked about the Winnipeg whiteout, but the sea of red, everybody out there is wearing a red jersey. I mean, you don't see any other color out there in the seats. I think it's remarkable. And second of all, Daryl Sutter is just an absolute character among coaches and among hockey figures out there. He's getting a little bit older. He's getting... I don't know if he has additional seasons in Calgary in store for him, given just how the team has performed so below expectations this year. But really, I think that to see him go out as a Stanley Cup champion just one more time would be fantastic as well. And as for those 2 spots in the Eastern Conference, we've got 3 teams battling for those. One of them is the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, they have the most Stanley Cups in the NHL since 1991. They've won 5, but now they are a true underdog. Even though they won the Cup back in 2017, they only have 1 playoff series victory since then, and they've been in the playoffs every year. And really, for them, it's like, can they get one more Stanley Cup with the legends out there that are Sidney Crosby and Yevgeny Malkin? This group, I don't expect anything from them. They don't do anything particularly well, I don't think. Chris Letang, by the way, also a possible future Hall of Famer. So I think they would be absolutely counted out, especially since they'll have to most likely go up against a team like Boston or maybe Carolina or New Jersey in the first round. The New York Islanders are the next team in the East I'll talk about. Their last Stanley Cup came 40 years ago in 1983. Kind of like the Devils, they are in that New York metropolitan area, but they are a bit overshadowed, I would say, by the Rangers. They don't have a ton of superstars, except one who could absolutely make a difference, and that is Ilya Sorokin. He could very well be a finalist for the Vezina Trophy as the best goaltender in the NHL, and I think that perennially now he'll be at least a top 3 goaltender in the NHL. The Islanders fans absolutely bring it. Now they're in a new arena. We heard how raucous they were at Nassau Coliseum just a couple years ago, but now that they're in UBS Arena, I think that could make for an absolute spectacle, even if you're just watching on TV. And they do have the identity line of Matt Martin, Casey Cizikas, and Cal Clutterbuck, probably the hardest hitting trio of forwards among any of these teams that I just talked about. And lastly, if you're considering teams who've never won a Stanley Cup, well, to you, I present the Florida Panthers. They have only one playoff series victory since 1996. That came last year. Now in 96, they went to the final. With the Panthers, I can't really find one specific compelling reason. I do follow them. They are kind of like my third favorite team, so I like them quite a bit. But really with them, they're in this position because Matthew Tkachuk, I think, has widely just carried this team the whole season long. And also Brandon Montour has been a very exciting defenseman who I don't think has been talked about this season either. Of course, you've got Alexander Barkov. I don't think he's been as much of an X factor this season, and in the playoffs, he hasn't been at his best per se, but now that he's in the prime of his career, maybe that can change here in the postseason, and there's a very, very small chance that we could see something like a Battle of Florida in the playoffs like we did the previous two seasons when the Panthers take on the Lightning. The tensions there are just absolutely boiling. And I didn't say it earlier, but the Flames, very, very small chance they could take on the Oilers in the first round in what would be the Battle of Alberta. That's an absolute spectacle in its own right. All right, Twisters, now don't forget, see the pinned comment down below where you can save all kinds on beautiful quality shirts like this from Into the AM. Bundle 3 shirts and you'll save an additional 10% by clicking that link down below or using the promo code McJesus. You heard me. And comment down below, who are you rooting for in the 2023 playoffs? Or let's say your favorite team is in the playoffs. Who would you root for after them? So be sure to let me know down there and stick around for more great coverage of the Stanley Cup playoffs. We're going to have more videos, some series previews as the playoffs advance, and also all kinds of live streams where you can connect with me and this wonderful community of fans in real time. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do hit the thumbs up, subscribe if you're new and want more content like this, and see the video description for all sorts of goodies, including where to keep up with me on social media. Hey, thanks so much for watching, guys. I'm Nick. I'll catch you Twisters later. Ciao.